Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm John DeDakis. I'm in Baltimore. I'm the author of the Lark Chadwick Mystery Suspense Thriller series, and I'm joined by Butler, Marcia Talley, and LynDee Walker. And we are going to be talking today about writing strong female protagonists. And because of the way the live Zoom is set up, I'm not going to introduce everyone because you'll be seeing me and not them. So, Marcia, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about who you are and also introduce us to your protagonist.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm Marcia Talley. I'm mostly from Annapolis, Maryland, but right now I'm in the Bahamas where my husband and I are trying to repair the cottage we have down here that was severely damaged by Hurricane Dorian. 18 months and still no power. And so we're staying in a friend's house, but the friend's house is right on the ocean. So poor me. But anyway, so I write the Hannah Ives mystery series. There are 18 books in the series. The 18th just came out. Amazon just started shipping it last week. It's called Done Gone. Hannah is a woman of a certain age. I kind of fudge on that now because when I first started writing her, I didn't know she was going to be a series. But she's from Annapolis. She's married to a Naval Academy math professor, and she sleuths in and around the Annapolis, Chesapeake Bay Area, Washington, D.C., although I sometimes let her go other places like the Bahamas or in the most recent book, she ends up in Syracuse and Ithaca, New York.
Okay. And LynDee, tell us about you and your protagonists.
About me. So I am a stay-at-home mom and full-time fiction writer. I live in Richmond, Virginia, but I grew up in Texas. And I guess I should mention the fact that in my former life, I was a newspaper reporter before I was a mom. And I write 2 different mystery series. The Nichelle Clark series has 8 novels in it, and it is about a cops and courts reporter because that's what I used to do for a living. And it is set in the Richmond area. She kind of has her hands full covering the police and courthouse beats while she is waiting for an opportunity to jump on to the high stakes national political reporting stage. But in the first book, when an ordinary accident assignment draws her into an extraordinary web of murder and betrayal, Nichelle has to learn how to use her smarts to solve mysteries and catch killers instead of just getting headlines. And then my second series has 3 books. I just finished the 4th one. It is due at the end of this month. And it is an entirely different character. It's more police procedural. The main character is a Texas Ranger. And she comes from an interesting background because her father used to be the governor of Texas, and her parents sort of raised her as a pageant queen who was supposed to grow up to be a trophy wife. And instead, she decided she wanted to be a police officer. And she has some intensely personal motivations for working so hard to become a ranger. There have been fewer than 20 women who have ever been field agents with the Texas Rangers. They were not allowed to serve as field officers until the early 1990s. So it's sort of maybe the last good old boys club left in law enforcement. And it's fun to write about her in that setting.
Excellent. And Ellen, tell us about, you have 2 protagonists as well. So tell us about you and them.
Right. So I write the Karina Carnell mystery series. And that takes place here in the Washington, D.C. area. She's a D.C. lobbyist. So she's an amateur sleuth, kind of falls into different adventures. They're not all murderers. I've got art heists. I've got diamond thefts. So she's not always falling over dead people, but she does get pulled into a bunch of different adventures. And I should probably mention that I used to work for a medical association here in the DC area in my former life. Before I started staying at home, my youngest son has special needs and needed a lot of my time when he was younger, and still needs quite a bit of it now that we're at home learning. So writing gave me flexibility and an outlet to be creative and do these sorts of things. So Karina Cardinal, I also have a historical fiction, and she's a spy. It's a World War II spy novel, and I'm actually starting to work on the next one. And I think I'm only going to do 2 on that one, but her name is Lily. And she grew up traveling all over Europe because her father worked for the State Department. And so she was learning languages along the way, and then war breaks out and they come to find that she's a valuable asset to have because of all the different languages that she works. And she also learned how to fit into things. So she's a spy. I also, thinking about it now, my very first novel that I wrote was called Poplar Place, and she's also a very strong protagonist, and that is a suspenseful women's fiction, let's call it. There's some romance, there's kind of a mystery that goes on there, and that sort of thing. And she was a DA, she was a district attorney in Pennsylvania that had something horrible happen, and so she kind of gave up everything and moved down to this little small town that I put her in, where some very interesting and quirky things happen there. And unfortunately, something happened up when she was up in Pennsylvania that follows her down to the small town and puts her in quite a bit of danger. So I guess I've been writing suspense for quite a while, because even I write romances as well. And even in my romance series, the Love California style romance series, all my ladies are pretty strong characters, and there's a good bit of suspense, except in the rom-com, which is just out and out funny stuff.
Okay. I want to invite people who are watching and listening to, if they have a question, write it in the chat, and I'll do my best to intercept those and ask them as we go forward. Just based on what you've all said, there's just a lot to talk about. And probably the elephant in the room is the whole concept of strong women, as if there's going to be a panel discussion ever on writing strong men. So my question is sort of a multi-part one. What makes your protagonists strong? And do you intentionally try to bake some weaknesses into your characters as well to make them more authentic? That's a question I'm just going to throw out on the table as a free-for-all. So whoever buzzes in first gets to answer.
I'll just say that I tend to write stronger women because sometimes in novels, when you have the wallflowery women, that just kind of turns me off personally. And I figure if we're going to be running around doing a lot of action, mystery, adventure, I'm going to be putting her in some sketchy areas. She needs to be pretty strong. But I always do give my strong women some sort of, what's what I'm looking for. They're not perfect. So sometimes, a lot of times, things go wrong because my character makes bad decisions, like we all do. When we're exhausted or it's too much is coming at us. And so I have my characters make some bad decisions occasionally, which will lead to mayhem, which you kind of need to have sometimes.
Exactly. Who wants to go next?
Marcia?
Marcia,
Yeah.
I see your mouth half open there.
Oh, yeah, I'm just going to do sign language now. But yeah, I think it's an interesting question. When I wrote my very first book, my first Hannah book, Sing It to Her Bones, the first line is, when I got cancer, I decided I wasn't going to put up with crap from anybody anymore. And I think that defines Hannah fairly well. I mean, she's well past that part of her life where she was recovering from chemotherapy and moving on, but she has a renewed lust for life, I'd say, because she knows how close she came to losing it. And so she also has compassion for other people who are in similar situations, which for a novelist comes in kind of handy, because Hannah finds herself often in groups with people who need help. Sometimes they're in therapy groups, sometimes she's asked to give a pep talk to somebody who has an issue or a problem. But she's very much a carpe diem kind of person. She appreciates life, but she doesn't risk her life unnecessarily either. Although she does make mistakes from time to time, but I think that all characters have to have flaws, otherwise they're boring.
LynDee, what about you? Do you bake weaknesses into your characters, and what makes your protagonists strong?
So I feel like for my characters, a lot of their strength comes from the fact that they are intelligent. And I think being smart women makes them curious about things. And also, in particular for Nichelle, she has a sort of tenacity where she doesn't give up and take the press release and write the easy story. She wants to find the truth and know what really happened, and she sort of feels this the level of indebtedness to her readers. She wants to provide them with the whole story, and a sense of responsibility in the job that she does. That I think is a really driving force for her. When we meet her, she's a young reporter in her late 20s who has been out of college for 5 years and sort of working at this job, biding her time, trying to get a job at the Washington Post. And she doesn't really know what she's getting herself into, and she's naive about a lot of things. She knows people at the police department. She's covered crime for a while, but she hasn't ever been involved in it or a target of people who are committing it. So she does make mistakes in the early books that it was important to me that the characters grow and learn and not stay the same over the course of all the books. And so she learns from the mistakes that she makes in the early books. You don't go meet a guy that you don't know who called and set up an appointment twice if it doesn't go so well for you the first time. You get a little smarter about setting stuff up in public places. And I think with Faith, the two of them are interesting because they have similarities, but they're very different in a lot of ways. And for Faith, she grew up in a very powerful, influential, wealthy family, and she doesn't really want anything to do with any of that by the time she's grown and she's working as a police officer. Her flaws come in that sometimes she doesn't realize that everybody else didn't have the same level of privilege that she did. But she's starting to learn and try to figure out how to deal with that. So it's fun to get to kind of discover different layers to them as you work through the books.
And I would think that personal experience plays a role in your creative process, all of you, in that I guess the question is, what percentage of your protagonists is actually drawn from your own life?
I
Go
always
ahead, Marcia.
Yeah, I always say that Hannah is smarter, younger, prettier than I am. But I think that the thing that I like most about her is she has a great sense of humor and self-deprecating. She thinks of things to say immediately, but actually, the author, it takes about 2 days to think of the appropriate response to somebody who says something to you that maybe you feel like you need to get back at them. Hannah thinks of it immediately. Me takes several days. So, but she does things that I've thought about doing ever since I started reading Nancy Drew books back when I was in the 4th or 5th grade. She would think nothing of breaking into a doctor's office and looking at patient files, or sneaking into the back door of a radio or a television station to try to talk to someone. She's much, much braver than I am. But I live vicariously through her, and it's just great fun. Whenever I finish a book, I think, oh gosh, it's like my best friend has gone on vacation until I can get back with her again. So
yeah. It's true for me too. I mean, I'm a man writing as a 20-something young woman. And although I used to be 20-something, I'm not that
You
in
were
either
never a
way.
woman.
I
No.
was never a woman, not in this life. And but I've been impressed with the women who are in my life, and I've learned a lot from them by asking questions. And so I can say that, my protagonist, Lark Chadwick, is sort of me with a skirt, although there was although she hates to dress up. So I was doing a book talk somewhere, and a woman raised her hand in the back and said, "What do you wear when you write?" So, but I do draw definitely from personal experience. And LynDee and Ellen, you two weigh in on this. How much of your protagonists are you?
I think a lot of people, I get that question a lot from readers actually, because it's easy to see in my bio that I used to do what Nichelle does for a living. I did not ever have hot mafia connected guys show up at random in my living room. I did not ever,
So you say, so you say.
I didn't ever get shot chasing a story. None of that fun stuff that she gets to do. But I mean, certainly she has a job that I once did, and some of my habits, she, at least in the early book, she has a tendency to play with her hair when she's deep in thought about something, which I have been teased about since I was in high school. But I think the more the series went on, the more she sort of became her own person. We had a lot of basic things in common in the early books. She was raised by a single mom. She's very, very close to her mother. All that sort of stuff. She has a great boss who does remind me a lot of the last editor that I worked for at a newspaper. She's a little naive about a lot of things when the books first start off, but like Marcia said, she's younger, she's prettier, she's braver. She can run in those crazy shoes that she wears, and I can't even walk in them. So so that sets her apart. Those books actually pick up a lot of things that I covered in real life when I was working as a reporter, but not probably the things that people think. There are very few of the big stories that Nichelle is after that are even loosely based on things that I actually covered, but some of the little funny side stories that she picks up from the police reports are things that really did happen that I wrote about when I was working.
Okay, Ellen.
Well, a lot of people asked me initially, are you like your character? And probably in the beginning, like LynDee said, there are probably like sayings or things that are similar, that hold a similarity to maybe the way I speak or something like that. But I would say that my character is far braver. She also makes decisions that I would not make, but if I didn't have her making these decisions, the story would end very quickly. So she's definitely braver, and I've done a lot of research for her, so I can't say, I mean, some of the things that she does in her background of her work life might be similar to things that I did, but her adventures in, the mysteries and detecting and that sort of thing. Yeah, I don't have that sort of thing. Although I do try and put in a lot of the people that I put into the book that help her out. Like I've got an FBI guy. I do have a connection with an FBI guy who gives me a lot of research. I have some police friends that have provide me a lot of great information for my research. And even some folks who work like private security. I've got a security company in there, and I've been able to, touch base with those folks when I'm writing. And it's interesting, actually, some of the things that people would be surprised about in my books that I put in there that are absolutely true, that are based on true things. For instance, I killed a guy by hacking his pacemaker, and I got the idea for that. Yeah, well, I got the idea for that because I saw an ad recalling pacemakers because they could be hacked. And then I did research on this whole thing, and sure enough, this was a real thing. Yeah, I've just, some of those things are I based on, and a lot of times at the end of my book, I'll give an afterword and I talk about what the real things are. I'll pick a particular thing to focus on that is based on something true. So I do try and keep it that. It may not be my truth, but it's out there and that sort of thing.
I teach a writing class at a number of different places, including the Writers Center in Bethesda. And there was a guy who took one of my classes, and he said, and I appreciated his honesty. He said, "I do not understand women, therefore I don't write them." And I thought that was stunning in many ways. And it sort of raises the question in terms of how do you as female authors with female protagonists deal with, or do you deal with in your stories, the Me Too movement and women navigating their way through male dominated careers?
I tend to avoid really controversial political issues like that. Every time I've tried, I've been knocked down by my editor. Cancel culture. A good example, I had a character in Done Gone, which is my latest book, who was based on a African-American woman that I knew many years ago. And I made her a housekeeper. And I was told in no uncertain terms that she couldn't be a housekeeper. And even though I loved this woman and I loved the way she spoke and she was a great character, I went back and I changed the character. So instead of a housekeeper, she's a landscape architect working on the home of the woman who disappears in the book. And she has an advanced degree in landscape architecture. She studied at Kew Gardens in London. And in the end, she's such a much more interesting character, I think. So I'm grateful for that. But at least with my books, I try to avoid political issues. Every once in a while, Hannah can't help herself, and she'll say something about, who's ever in power, or a senator or something. She once sleuthed with a Maryland senator. And I think I said the senator was a Democrat, but that's as close to political as I get.
Okay.
Yeah.
LynDee or Ellen, in terms of navigating the whole Me Too thing. Ellen, you're smiling, go for it.
I'll admit, I haven't done the Me Too, but she's a lobbyist. She's a DC lobbyist. And in the second book, Fatal Legislation, the first chapter, I'm killing off a senator. So, yeah,
so there's a catharsis. There's a certain catharsis involved here.
I actually had a lot of people who were like, "Can I give you an idea?" And if there's any this is there's no, it's all coincidental. If the senator seems to remind you of anyone, it's totally coincidental.
All the names have been changed. Yeah.
Yeah, there's made up. Yeah, I make up senators' names. And there's definitely a political slant to that one because of why he's murdered. Turns out to be a political thing. And I'll admit that one, I get a lot, I don't get a lot, but I've certainly gotten some reviews that say, I didn't like all the politics in it. But I've also seen people who gave those reviews follow on to the next one in the series. So that's really the only one where politics was a pretty major focus, Fatal Legislation. But the rest of them, her lobbyist job is kind of more of a side thing, because we're more focused on whatever the mystery it is, whether it's the diamond theft or the artifact forgery or whatever it is. And I have had actually people put them in some of the other books and say, "Oh, I'm glad there wasn't all this politics in this book." And I actually had a tough time trying to put ads on Facebook for Fatal Legislation because they started pumping up all their political stuff, and they wanted me to register as a political entity. And I was going back and forth, and the algorithms kept nailing it. So I stopped running ad. I just stopped trying to, because they kept getting, denied. So now I'll run the whole series, but that one I won't run separately because it's so difficult.
Okay, and LynDee, you have a protagonist who's a reporter and another who's a Texas Ranger. So, I know for a fact that newsrooms can be very sexist, and I'm sure, one of your protagonists is like one of the only female Texas Rangers. So how have you handled that? And has there been blowback once you've put them into print?
I think that in the Faith McClellan series, where the character is a Texas Ranger, there's definitely, I mean, she starts off in the first book delivering paperwork back and forth between one company office and another. And this is a woman who, I mean, the Texas Rangers is not an organization where you can just get out of college and go turn in an application and get a job there. It's not the way it works. People work for years, and there are lots of prerequisites and requirements, and they pretty much are an elite investigative unit for the state, which makes them super interesting to write about because they cover everything you could possibly want to write about in crime fiction. And so for her to have worked that hard to get there, and in particular to be a homicide detective with a perfect case clearance record, which is very rare, and be guarding paperwork, is frustrating for her. But she kind of digs in. She has a mentor in the Rangers. Part of the reason that she wanted that job is because one of the guys who used to work her father's protection detail when she was a kid has sort of been a father figure to her because her dad is not much of a dad. And so he kind of encourages her to keep hanging in there. And I think she makes a comment to the effect of, "My arms are getting tired," but she keeps going, and she gets into this murder case that she solves as a Ranger, sort of under the radar and off the clock. And she knows from watching all of the politics that went on in her house and in the governor's mansion and around her father when she was a kid, that if she just keeps pushing and she can prove herself to these people and earn their respect, then her life and her job will get a lot easier. So that's sort of her mission in the books, is just to keep going until she can make them respect her. She doesn't really have a problem with people putting their hands on her, because I think she could probably beat them up if they did. There's a scene in the second book actually where they have a very large, very muscle-bound sheriff's deputy who is kind of sexist and chauvinistic, and Faith's old partner brings him to the Rangers training room to spar with Faith, and he says, "Oh, I don't need headgear, she's just a girl," and ends up kind of getting his butt kicked in front of a whole room full of people. So it's fun. It's an interesting world to write about. And I kind of wanted to write about that dynamic of a woman working in an all male environment. I grew up listening to my mom tell stories about other people getting promoted above her because they were men who had families that they had to provide for, except so did she. And, that was corporate America in the 80s. And it was interesting to sort of stumble across a world where that could still kind of be the case in 2018 when I wrote the first Faith book.
Yeah.
So
yeah. It's incredible the the things I've learned from talking to the women I worked with at CNN. I can remember two conversations that stand out. One was with Carol Costello, who was an anchor I used to edit for. And I remember asking her, I said, what's it like for guys to be coming on to you all the time? And she said, in 20 seconds, this is before she got married. She said, I can decide in 20 seconds if it's a safe situation or if I'm interested. And then there was another woman who was just getting a divorce, and she made an offhand comment about, I always seem to fall for the bad boys. And I asked her, why is that? And she jolted, and it was like no one had ever asked her that. And she thought about it for a minute, and she said, and she didn't mean this to be conceited, she said, they're the only ones that have the confidence to approach me. Which I thought was incredibly insightful. And I was able to bake that into some of my protagonists' situations when I've created her. And I've waded right into the political thing. This is my most recent novel, Fake, which I started writing when Trump was elected. It was not meant to be an anti-Trump polemic, but I was very troubled with, journalists are the enemies of the American people. And so I really wanted to address the issue of fake news and the consequences of that. So So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. We've talked about change in terms of your characters, and Marcia, I want to start with you because you've written 18 books over the course of what, 20, 25 years, something like that.
22.
And
Yeah.
as I said, 22. So, and it's the same protagonist. So how do you keep, how do you deal with change? How does your character evolve, and how do you work change into that?
Well, I think that my books are roughly set at the time they were written. For instance, I had a book that my third book was written around 1999. So it was set with the Y2K controversy. What's going to happen when we switch over to 2000? So they're contemporaneous. But as I said earlier, I didn't know when I first wrote Sing It to Her Bones that I was writing a series. So in book one, Hannah's already, she has a grown daughter, and at the end of the book, we find out that she's going to be a grandmother. So we know she's got to be probably around 40. So, fast forward 22 years, I no longer mention her age. Although her children, she now has 3 grandchildren, and one of them is in college, so we can kind of figure it out. But I think the thing that keeps the books fresh for me anyway is each book explores an issue that I'm passionate about or that I find really interesting. Like my fourth book was about, I had read about viatical settlements, which briefly is when you're terminally ill and you have a life insurance policy, you can find a third party to sell it to, so you can get the money right now. And then when you croak, they become your beneficiary. You don't even have to know this person. And I thought, what a creepy way to make a buck for an investor. It's really like the death future. So I wrote a book about that. And then the other way I keep the novels fresh is that almost everyone, Hannah is sleuthing with a different person in her circle. Sometimes it's a sister, sometimes it's a sister-in-law. Sometimes it's in one case in the book called Without a Grave, which is set in the Bahamas, she's sleuthing with an 80-year-old next door neighbor who's like a superannuated Nancy Drew and just a whole lot of fun based on somebody I really know. And in one book, she actually is doing a lot of babysitting because her daughter is trying to start a business. She and her husband are opening a spa. And I always thought when I was young, what do all these soap opera women do with their kids when they go off to have dinner or lunch somewhere? So Hannah ends up sleuthing with her 10-month-old granddaughter in a backpack. And I was able to work that into the plot when Chloe gets out of the backpack and crawls into someone's house through an open door. And when Hannah goes in to get her, she sees something that's important. So I try to mix it up. Every book has a different sidekick. One of my most recent books, her sidekick is her niece, Julie, who is the oldest daughter of her sister, Jordina. So it's just a lot of fun to do that. And I think it keeps the stories fresh.
Mm-hmm. Ellen, tell us about your character and how, especially Nichelle, how she changes.
Well, Karina's still, she's developing, much like Marcia. I do, she gets different people involved in her activities, although we have 2 main ones, her FBI guy and her Silverthorne security guys. They often help her when she's in dire danger. But like Marcia, I tend to like find something that I find very interesting and I'll start researching it. And so sometimes our stories have to do with things that I just read in a newspaper, and then I go down a research rabbit hole and I'm like, oh, I got to put my character involved in this. That's how the very first novel came about, with Isabella Stewart Gardner museum heist that happened back in 1990. I happened to catch just a tail end of a documentary on it, and down a rabbit hole I went, and so I put my character in the midst of this, 30 years after it's happened, where is the art now? Because it's still missing. It's $500 million worth of art is still missing to this day. So I did the what if, and she's definitely developing. Actually, in my last one, Pharaoh's Forgery, one of the things that I kind of touched on was the fact that she was having some mental issues, because I put her in a lot of harrowing events, and her sister was kidnapped in the one beforehand. And so I kind of have her dealing with that a little bit, that she wasn't dealing with it in the very beginning, and then she gets convinced to deal with it and talk to people about it, because she was kind of feeling down. I send her on vacation to Mexico, and a lot of stuff happens there, so she can't focus on what's going on in her head. But as she returns on the flight home, she's still feeling that, oh, something's not right. I'm dreading going back home. I'm dreading how to deal with it. And so we've started dealing with it. And actually, in a lot of interviews and things that I did for promotion for the book, a lot of people wanted to talk about that and get into that a little bit. The fact that, this, and she's not trained. She's not like a police officer or military person. So she's just as an amateur sleuth, all this stuff is coming at her. And I said, if this happened to anyone, I would think that they would have some mental issues to be dealing with. So that I'm kind of worked on developing that a little bit with her.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And LynDee, what about you in terms of your protagonist's evolution?
How they grow. So when I first started writing the Nichelle series, it was really important to me that she learn and grow and change over the course of the books. And she does. She gets smarter about the way that she solves crime. She gets better at reading people over the course of the books. I mean, I think as a journalist, you already kind of have a little bit of that going in. She's pretty good at being able to spot when somebody's lying to her, even in the first book. But she gets better at reading people in general and certain specific situations as the books go on. She learns her lessons from mistakes that she makes in the earlier books. A lot of people, I get a lot of comments from readers about all the fun, cute shoes that I put her in the books. And they, it's funny to me that people notice that and say, I looked these up, or, hey, my sister has a pair of shoes like that, or whatever. They were always part of her character from the very first time she popped into my head. She was locked in a car trunk down in Chaco Bottom, and she was in trouble trying to figure out how she was going to get out of the car trunk because somebody had cut the little, emergency release pull thing. And she had these crazy shoes on, and she didn't know what sort of terrain she was going to be on when she got out. And as the series evolved, I kind of figured out that I think my brain spit that out, because it's a good handy way for a reporter to have a weapon. She's not a police officer. She doesn't carry a gun. She doesn't have, she doesn't have a way to defend herself when she gets in trouble, but she's got these shoes with these, 4-inch spike sharp heels on them that will do in a pinch to whack somebody with if she needs to just be able to turn and run away. So
Hannah once killed somebody with a big fish hook.
There you go. See?
The kind that you use for deep sea fishing. It worked out really well.
You can just MacGyver a weapon out of anything that's laying around.
My character likes to hit people with her car by accident.
Yeah.
Okay.
She's opened a door and whacked someone. Wham! I did a short story. She accidentally hit a blind guy. That didn't.
Oh.
The guy didn't end up being blind, but initially she thinks she hits a blind guy.
Oh my!
It's safe for me that we're all digital and we're not in person. I need to stay away from you guys.
Yeah. My son read one of my short stories, and he was like, "Mom, you're kind of psycho." I was like, it's mystery.
I don't know. I mean, as far as I know, the Suffolk Mystery Authors Festival is predominantly for people who are readers, but I wouldn't be a bit surprised if there are some people out there who are wannabe writers. And so what kind of advice do you have for people who would really kind of like to try their hand at this, even if they don't think that they're a writer? What are some tips of the trade that someone might be able to appropriate and apply in their own lives?
The best piece of advice that I've ever gotten is sit your butt in the chair and write it. I can't tell you how
But
many
what if
times
it's
I've
but
been.
what if it's not any good?
Oh no, I can't tell you how many times I've been at signings or events and people say, "Oh, I got this great idea and I've been thinking about it," or sit down,
Yeah.
write it. You got to get something on paper.
Yep. And give yourself permission to write crap.
There you go.
Just write every day, and just write. And some of it is awful and you don't have to use it. But there'll be some gems in there. And when you can come back, let it rest, come back, throw out the stuff that's crap and move on. I like to tell the story that the very first time I had somebody other than a close relative read what I'd written, which was the bravest thing I ever did, was at the Swanee Writers Conference at the University of the South, which I highly recommend. But my one-on-one conversation with my mentor at the time was John Casey, who's from the University of Virginia, and National Book Award winner. And he read my pages and he said, "When I read your first chapter, I knew I was in the hands of a born storyteller, but the rest of the novel is crap." And, he was absolutely right. And I went home and I took the crappy parts out. And about 3 or 4 years later, I had a book that had a few crappy parts, the editor said, but basically you just sit and write and write and write.
How did you all deal with the self-doubt? Because the story you just told, Marcia, could have just killed someone's spirit. How do you how do you get the courage or the confidence, to power through those early drafts that aren't any good?
A lot of wine.
Both the WHWYNE and WHIN.
No, actually, what I did is I got hooked up with a writer's critique group almost right away, and we've been together since 1996. Believe it or not, we meet every month. Membership comes and goes, but Mary Ellen Hughes and I are still the original members, two of the original members. And that's how I got my confidence, because, they tell me, tough love, this works, this doesn't work, this character, nah. So step 2, get with a critique group if that style suits you. Some people it doesn't suit at all.
Mm-hmm.
So it works.
LynDee, what can you add?
I think you have to learn to distance yourself from the work, and that's probably the hardest part of it for most people. Similar to Marcia, but my group was online, but I found an online support group of writers, and we would trade pages back and forth and watching what everybody else was going through, trying to sell their books, and getting advice from them on how I could improve mine was really helpful to me. But at some point it has to become not like you pouring out your soul onto paper, but if you really want to sell it, it's a product, and you have to want to make it the best product you possibly can. And that means taking your hurt feelings away from it and listening to people when they say, "Hey, here's what you do to make this better." I mean, I've gotten edit letters over the years. I got one for the Faith McClellan book, actually, that came out on Tuesday just this past summer. And I adore my editor, and he's wonderful, but he's super insightful and always has something to say that will make the book better. And this one, I got this wonderful glowing edit letter that I should probably frame and put on a wall in here somewhere, where he was like, "This is start to finish stellar." And I loved it. And there wasn't a single scene that I was like, "We have to take that out back and shoot it in the neck. This is great." And I wanted to write him back and say, "No, really, tell me what I can do to make it better." And I always want to deliver a better book than I did last time. So
one of the things I discovered in the classes that I teach is that one of the things that seems to paralyze a beginning writer is whether or not to write in first person or third person. And the advice I give, and I'd be interested in your take on this, is that for your first draft, write in the way that's comfortable for you. And I write in first person because I journal like a fiend. And so writing first person is comfortable, because as a manuscript editor, a lot of times I see efforts that are third person, but they feel clunky because it's an awkward way of telling a story unless you're very deft at it. And so my question to you all is my advice helpful in terms of choosing what point of view, or because I know in the rewrite you can certainly make changes, but is that a good bit of advice for a beginning writer to write in the first person because that's the way they naturally communicate?
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. When you're starting out, certainly, just to say, however it comes most naturally to you. I think for me, it's however the words come into my head, and I've done both, but there are definitely advantages character-wise to being in first and being able to share thoughts and that sort of stuff.
Right. It does handicap you a little bit because, Hannah, for instance, can't possibly know what's going through the head of somebody who's across the table from her, or Lord knows in the next room, that you can do if you're writing in the third person and head hopping like a lot of romance writers do. It's kind of a style. Drives me nuts because I like to be in someone's head firmly, at least for a chapter,
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Ellen, what about you in terms of
story, thrillers?
Well, I started out doing more romance, and I still wrote my romances in first person, but I did get a lot of flack about it not being in third person because, like Marcia said, there's a lot of romances that are most romances, I think, are generally written in third person, so you can head up and you can get in the guy's head and that sort of thing. And what I started doing to satisfy my editors was the woman would be in first person, and then if I'd get to a chapter and I would make the male in third person, so you would see his point of view from the third person point of view. And they liked that, so that you still saw from the male's point of view and that sort of thing. So that's basically what I did when I was doing that in romance. I like the mystery being in first person because she doesn't always know what other people are thinking, and so she doesn't always know what's coming at her. And that's kind of a part of the way that I can build the suspense. Is you and I, my reader is going to be in her head, and you're trying to figure out what's going on around you. And so when things come at you sideways, it really is kind of scary, and all these things start going on and you don't know why until we get to the point in which it can be explained to my character and it can be explained to the reader at that time. So I think it just depends on what you're comfortable with. That is what I've recommended when people have asked me about it. What are you comfortable writing? If you prefer third person and you're good at it, then write it.
Excellent. I'm going to take a sharp turn, and another elephant in the room is the pandemic that's going on. Is there an urge that you have to write about it or not to write about it? The impression I get from the conversations I've had is, we've lived it. We want to go back to normal.
Right. I just sent my novel to my editor, and I asked her in it, I was like, I wrote this little piece at the end, and I was like, should I say something about it? And I wrote a little piece explaining why my character is not wearing masks and all that crap. And she said, don't bother. She said, just delete it. Just put your character. People can figure out that it happened before, or maybe it happened after, whatever the case. So I've left it out because it's limiting.
And there have been recent articles that I've read both sides in various publications. Yes, do it. No, do it. But I think predominantly the no's outweigh the yeses.
Yeah. LynDee, you agree too?
Oh yeah, I feel like I kind of started off last year thinking, I would like to provide an escape for people, maybe more than ever before at this point. And I had a weird situation where I had already started one book before it really hit and became a thing. And then when I got sick last spring, I was like, I really don't want to write about this because it sucks. And I wouldn't wish it on anybody, not even people that I made up. And and now the book that I'm working on, or that I just finished, that I kind of wrote through the rest of it, is not going to be out until next year. And so why
Right.
it's not scheduled to launch until early 2022. And I thought there's no point in putting it in here because hopefully it will be behind us by then and nobody's going to want to read about it.
So let me finish up by asking each of you to tell us, this is the shameless self-promotion part of the thing. Tell us what you're working on that's coming up next. Marcia, why don't we start with you and we'll go around.
Well, I think I mentioned that my latest book, just out, hot off the press, is Done Gone. And the brief story is Hannah is she's part of a supper club. They meet once a month and rotating around houses, and it's her turn for Italian night. And her across the street neighbors, who are good friends, just simply don't show up. No word, nothing. And so Hannah, who has a key because she takes care of the couple's cat when they're away, goes across the street to check on them. And it appears like they've just done gone. They vanished and there's no explanation that she can think of. And about 3 days later, she gets a phone call from Trish, who is her friend who's missing, who says, come meet me in a parking lot. And when she shows up, she's heavily disguised and is about to tell Hannah everything, gives her a thumb drive and tells her that she needs to deliver it to somebody at a specific reporter at the New York Times. And then she's shot. So Hannah has to get to the bottom of, figure out why her friend was missing, what's on the drive. Does she take it to the guy or to the reporter or not? And it ends up involving some very powerful people in the end. So it was fun to write, and that's Done Gone.
Okay, excellent. Ellen, tell us about what's happening with you next.
Well, the next Karina Cardinal that's coming out this fall, September, and it's called Swindler's Revenge. And it is about her, she starts out with the FBI knocking on her door and coming to serving a search warrant. They're looking for her FBI friend, who is now her ex-boyfriend in this novel. And he has been accused of taking money and colluding with a money launderer that got away 4 years ago, and then on a case that he was on. And he's not at her place, but he reaches out to her, and we start to unravel this money launderer. And it's actually was inspired by my FBI friend who used to work in white collar, now works in cyber crimes. And there was a money launderer who I kind of loosely based my character, some of the characteristics and things on. So that's kind of what's coming up.
Okay, excellent. LynDee.
So I have a new book that just came out this past Tuesday. It is the third book in the Faith McClellan series. It is called No Sin Unpunished. The first two books do a lot of alluding to Faith's past and her family, and I get a lot of questions from readers through email and messages about her background. And so in this book, I was able to answer some of those. It starts off with her investigating a very interesting, different sort of a fire, and then quickly turns to a lot of a series of those that happen around the city, and the victims all seem to be politicians who were part of her father's cabinet back in the day. And so the case sort of turns personal for her, and it gives an interesting ability to look inside her family and see her interact with her parents in a way that she doesn't in the other book. I just finished writing the fourth Faith book. It is due out early next year, I believe. And as soon as I get it turned in and shipped off to my editor, I actually am starting a new series. So lots of stuff going on, but all of it fun.
Okay, excellent. I'm working on right now. I am in procrastination mode. I think we all know that as well. I'm working on a memoir. My sixth novel is in idea form, which means it's nothing. And the other thing that's interesting is that when my first novel came out in 2005, and it was in print for like 15 years, and then the publisher went out of business. And almost the week after that happened, a new publisher came along and said, I'm interested. And so my first novel is coming out, is already out. It's just new cover, all that kind of stuff. So in a sense, if you've never read the series, you can start now. And Bluff is the second book, and I'm proofreading the galleys on that. So soon there'll be the first two novels that then you'll be able to pick up and go on with. So thank you. Thanks also to Katie Kelly with the Suffolk Mystery Authors Festival for making this all possible.
Hey, Katie.
Thank you, Katie.
So thank you all for being here. I'm John DeDakis, and we've been with Ellen Butler and LynDee Walker and Marcia Talley. And please keep in touch with us. We've been talking to each other. We can't see you, so right now it's we would love to have your feedback. So you know how to get in touch with us through our website. So thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you. Y'all have a great weekend.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for coming.